Hi, I'm Arthur, and this is part 6 in a 20-part series I am doing, discussing the most bestest chapters of Space Marines that ever done existed. The All-Stars, if you will. Do you need to have seen the other parts to understand this one? Yes, you do. Go watch them right now, or else I'll be sneaking mayo into your socks later? Yeah, I'll do that. The Blood Angels are a chapter of Marines so well known that I wouldn't be surprised to find out if they were one of the top 5 most played factions in the game, in a list composing all of the factions, including every side Space Marine chapter out there, as well as the Xenos sub-factions. With a good reason. The mix of nobility and savagery gives them this visage of something at least vaguely resembling a unique concept, when in fact the idea of the Blood Angels is just taking the myth of the vampire and running it back to its origins of Vlad the Impaler, and then boom, you got the Blood Angels, but that's neither here nor there. I have always felt like the Blood Angels are exactly where they need to be in terms of popularity. Not overhyped or underhyped. They have some of the coolest characters and some of the better lore, with a few stumbles here and there. I do have some successors I like more than others, and some others I fucking despise, but don't worry, we'll be talking about the Lamenters more in the future. But when I say that my favorite successor of Blood Angels is the Flesh Terrors, you should note that the Flesh Terrors are in fact one of my top 5 chapters in the history of the setting, and even probably top 5 factions, including every other Xenos one out there. I fucking adore the Flesh Terrors, and if it wasn't for the fact the newest editions of the Blood Angels range suck dirty balls, I would have probably picked them up at some point, but that is neither here nor there as well. The Flesh Terrors are one of those factions that on an aesthetic level I adore them, but on a philosophical level I'm willing to rave about them from the tops of buildings. As much as I like to think I'm a bastion in the lore community, I am literally just here with a no thoughts, just vibes mentality. I am here to tell you what I feel and my interpretations of the lore in order to give you guys a better idea of reading comprehension, more so than act like a textbook you can read from. So with that being said, this is a no books allowed video, as we are talking about the Flesh Terrors, where I am going to discuss the lore, the history, the tactics, the Gabriel Seths of the chapter, and give you an idea of how they function, which is going to be fun and all, but I'm also going to go and discuss why I think they're one of my favorite chapters and why you should probably see them from a different light at the end of this video, maybe give you a different perspective. It's a long story, but before I get into anything involving the Flesh Terrors, I gotta mention, hey, did you know I have a second YouTube channel? It's called Arthur After Dark, and I do long-form video essays about horror video game bullshits I really like. It's probably some of the highest quality content that I have ever made, and if you want more stuff to watch of mine, and in a different delivery style no less, then there is that. You should go check it out. It's now going to be in the description of all of my videos, so go check it out. I literally just uploaded another video last week, and I try to upload monthly. Okay, cool. The beginning of the Flesh Terrors is one that, if I may be so bold as to say, is one of the most GW moves ever. So there happens to be a bit of a naming convention that they stick to quite a lot. The oldest chapters of Space Marines out there, which the Flesh Terrors are one of those, tend to get their names from very funny places. Though I will also state, even though I'm going to be kind of shit-talking the naming conventions here, there isn't really many misses in the second founding. Most of them are pretty cool, even if some of them have pretty dumb names. I don't think off the top of my head I could name a single bad second founding chapter, except for like maybe the Yellow Jackets, but I don't know, I like the B Marines. They're pretty funny. But the naming conventions outside of like the weird one-offs like them is kind of funny. Like Fafnir Ran, Dorn's executioner from the Horus Heresy, became the chapter master of the Executioners. Ah, clever, that one. Hell yeah. The first chapter master and the person who named the Flesh Terrors was a man by the name of Nasir the Flesh Terror Amit, who, as much as I clown on him a bit here, he is pretty damn cool as far as Space Marines go, being a remnant of the Revenant Legion, which, if you don't know what that is, the TLDR is that prior to the discovery of a Primarch, the Legion that the Space Marines are a part of tends to be a bit more unruly and have a bit of a different idea of how they should go about combat. And the Revenant Legion was what the Blood Angels were called before they discovered Sanguinius. Sanguinius. They were, and I'm not joking, so terrible that the World Eaters at their worst would likely be chosen over them for a more civilized deployment. They were sent in to scour and terrorize worlds. They were rage and hunger incarnate. But the thing is, when Sanguinius showed up, he literally just like domesticated them like taking in a stray cat, turning them into the noble sons of Sanguinius we know and love and appreciate and draw a lot of gay fan art for. Any of the Legion members who did not conform to this ideology of nobility 100% ended up being put into the Fifth Company, which is basically the dedicated idiot company. It's just a bunch of people who would really just want to eat people and not really think about it too much. These guys were brutes, and the brutest brute was at the top of their hierarchy, and that was Nasir Amit, the Flesh Terror. Though I will state, he isn't completely devoid of strategy or mental clarity, far from it. He was a bully and a berserker, but due to a lot of the specialized training that Sanguinius would put him through later on in his career as a captain there, he actually learned how to balance out his rage with pragmatism. I won't go too in depth with that just yet, because I do want to also cover a lot of the Horus Heresy at some point, but in general, the best way to see him is he is a pragmatic individual, but also knows how to let loose and just go berserk. He sees the practicality of rage. I think that is a theme we are going to see a lot throughout this discussion of the Flesh Terrors, as during their founding, the pragmatism of rage was a key element to their initial chapter's culture. Being sent off to the Pharaoh world of Cretaceous, which I believe is filled with dinosaurs, it'd be such a waste of a good name if it didn't have Cretaceous period animals, but whatever. The Flesh Terrors cultivated rage and anger as a mainstay genetic curse for their chapter, though they don't really see it as a drawback to it. See, the thing with anger and rage, especially for the Sons of Sanguinius, is that it feeds into their actual genetic curses, you know, the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. The Red Thirst is a berserker frenzy that causes you to go a bit crazy at the sight of blood, causing you to become enraged and hungry for that red crimson thing spilling out of people. It causes you to see more and more and desire to see more and more, thus you want to rip people to pieces, and it also causes them to act a little bit stronger. Now, there is also the Black Rage, which the angrier you get, the more likely you are to get some kind of psychic feedback that causes you to regress your mind and psychically see the last thing that Sanguinius saw upon his death, which was traitors, Horus, and all this horrible chaos shit all around him. And, well, it's kind of like someone putting on a glove that's just a bit too small. A Primarch is now in the body of this Space Marine and makes them fight a lot harder and fight a lot stronger, but it causes them to go hopelessly insane and likely almost never comes back. Now, there are a few Marines in history that have come back from the Black Rage, but those people are not to be mentioned here. Regardless, this rage culture led to one of the more tragic ends for Nasir Amit, the chapter master. Yeah, you thought Alexis Pollux being spat in the face with an acid loogie and dying after 3 days was a bit ignoble. Nah, bro. Nasir Amit was so depressing the way he died that when Gabriel Seth, their current chapter master, found out about how he died, he actually just hid away in his room and pouted for like 2 weeks straight. It was kind of funny. But Nasir Amit essentially realized that the rage was building more and more in him, and that at a certain point he would be uncontrollable even by his own men. Now, still wanting to be a bit of a noble leader and not die like some savage animal, he took a small ship and a drop pod, launched it into space, and just decided to say fuck it and succumb to the Black Rage for all eternity on some random planet. I believe that the implication is that he fell to Khorne, which, fair enough, angry, but whatever. This legacy of rage also had a byproduct of the chapter, without the right discipline from Nasir leading them, being always on the verge of being removed from the Imperium. Throughout their history, they were known to go into frenzies on the battlefield, which would lead to them being incredibly effective, but, you know, slaughtering enemies and allies with the same degree of brutal effectiveness. They were at multiple times being at risk of seeing censure from the Inquisition, and even the Blood Angels at large were kind of hounding them to rein it in a little bit. But this was actually mitigated by the ascension of their current and probably one of the best chapter masters in the history of 40k, if not one of the best characters in the setting, Gabriel Seth. Yeah, the entire next 10 minutes of this video is going to basically be me talking about how cool and strong and handsome Gabriel is, so I'm sorry, but he's one of my favorite characters in the setting, and I don't even really like Blood Angels that much, but I do have a very soft spot for him because he's one of the first characters I learned about. So who exactly is Gabriel Seth? Gabriel Seth is one of those space marines that I can't help but smile whenever he's in a scene in a book or is like half-heartedly mentioned to be in the background doing something horrible. The Guardian of Rage. Gabriel Seth is the most recent and current chapter master of the Flesh Terrors, and appeared at likely the most important time for them, as at the time of his ascension to chapter master, his chapter was basically on the precipice of being kicked into the obscurity nexus that is being declared a renegade. Basically, at the time, they were known as civilian murderers. They were not known to be efficient, but they were known to be effective, which there is a difference. Now, there is obviously going to be some edgelord in the comments screeching, well, if they get the job done, who cares if they kill civilians? Oh my god. But that is... Okay, let me introduce you to this book here. This is an abnormal psychology textbook, and then once you finish reading it, we can continue our little conversation here. And also, you should probably just go back to liking the Marines malevolent. Sure, Occam's razor is a great idea, but if your modified version of the trolley problem has you strapping high explosives onto the cart and ramming it into the group of 5 people instead of the group of 1, because there was a group of 10 orcs on the other side, well, then perhaps you should probably not be in charge of keeping the peace, no? Gabriel Seth came into the chapter as its chapter master and enacted wide-sweeping reforms to keep the chapter's culture of rage and brutality intact, but it was also using their talents more selectively and efficiently, dropping in the chapter in areas where they were only going to face enemies with very minimal chance of casualties on the civilian side of things, as well as collateral damage to the infrastructure of local civilian settlements. Basically, it was also keeping them away from the prying eyes of the Inquisition and keeping them on the path of the right and narrow. He was, in a lot of ways, what Nasir Amit was in his heyday. Rage incarnate, but understanding the pragmatism of rage, not so much being consumed by rage for the sake of it. Now, does this mean that Gaby Wavy wasn't a blood-drinking savage? No. This dude is one of the most wrathful and violent Marines in the history of the setting, to the point where I'm pretty sure there is a heat shimmer around him at all times, and the feats of physical strength that he pushes are so disconcerting, he actually might be on a tier of his own in terms of physical might. Like, in one of my favorite books, The Assassination of Gabriel Seth, literally I think the first 40k novel that I ever read, or well, listened to, because it is an audio drama, he was locked in an adamantine crypt where all of the dead flesh terrors that are ever recovered lay on an active pilgrimage to remind him as to why he does what he does. His accompanying chaplain betrayed him because said chaplain wanted to go back to the way things were. Rage for the sake of rage. So he locked Gabe in the crypt, sealed the door, and secretly snuck in an Eversor assassin to deal with him. Now, the interesting thing about this matchup is that Eversors are really good at dealing with the Berserkers, if you couldn't figure that one out, because they are close-up fighters. One of the best, if not the best, close-up fighter in the entirety of the Assassinorum. But if they die, they also explode, killing people in a shower of gore, viscera, and whatever the heck Frenzon is. So, say Gabriel loses his mind to the rage and wins the fight relatively easily, which is kind of his superpower. He would rip the Eversor apart, only to be killed by the ensuing bio-meltdown that occurs after they die. Prior to that, I should mention that the chaplain that enacted this plan gave this big villain monologue about how he's going to return the chapter to their blood-slick glory days from behind the adamantine doors of a crypt that he had just locked Gabriel in. Gabriel, to his credit, punched the door with all of his might and caused it to buckle. Now, I should note that Gabriel doesn't use a power fist. He just had power armor and raw muscle backing it, and he caused a dent in the door, which rightfully made the chaplain go a little wide-eyed at the sight of it and decide to leave. That is, for context, adamantine is what they use in Terminator armor. What the f*** are they feeding him, Ogrins? But yeah, to his credit, he dealt with the Eversor in the most Gabriel way possible while also still being incredibly petty. free. So what did he do? Well, instead of losing himself to the rage, he realized that if he did, he would die. So he broke every limb that the Eversor had, left it almost dead, and then broke out, sneaking the Eversor assassin into the private quarters of the chaplain and just letting it explode the second he got in there. Gabriel is not a man you wish to McFuck with, because he will straight up murder anyone who would dare step in his way, as well as the way of the betterment of the chapter. His chapter. He is a stalwart force, and honestly, I love the fact that he is such a fun character, and in a lot of ways, it might just be because I have brain problems, but I find him so relatable as a character. But we'll get into that a little bit later. One of the other moments I want to highlight about him is during the devastation of Baal, and okay, I do have a bit of a confession to make here. When I first read the devastation of Baal, I actually didn't like it. It took me a while to find out why, because on paper, a lot of the shit that should be there is really cool. Like, all of it sounded cool when someone explained it to me, but when I read it, I just bounced so hard. So I ended up figuring it out, and it was really dumb. So fun fact, fellas, if you didn't know, I'm severely dyslexic, as well as have very severe ADHD. Reading books normally for me is incredibly difficult unless I lock in really, really hard, which requires quite a lot of stimulants. Codex readings are the worst, but I still push through them so that I can understand what the most up-to-date information is for a lot of the most recent factions. But in general, reading is tough. So when it comes to long-form novels like The Devastation of Baal, I try to mix things up to give myself the best benefits in terms of absorbing all the information. So I usually read a digital copy at the same time as listening to an audiobook, following along. It helps transcribe the information to me in a way that allows me to activate most of my senses, both visual and auditory. But a lot of times, my easiest way of going about it is just, if it's something that's pretty easy for me to consume, like a Night Lord's book, I usually just listen to the audiobook, like when I'm going to the gym or just staring at the ceiling. So I'm not going to shame the voice actor here because it's Gareth Armstrong. Gareth Armstrong is the man who read the Devastation of Baal book, and he's read a lot of books that I enjoyed quite a lot. And one of them is, well, not one of them, but most of the Dark Angels books in the Horus Heresy, to my knowledge, are narrated by him, and he does a great job for them. I loved how he did the voices for each of the characters, but for some reason, his idea of any Blood Angel in this book, a superhuman gothic, Victorian-fashioned vampire muscle man, is to go nasally and high-pitched, and it made all of them sound like they were a bunch of hunched-over people pretending to be a vampire the entire time, and it did not, it just took me out of the book so often whenever he was just describing them, and I just kept imagining being so gaunt and creepy looking rather than what they're supposed to be, which is super burly, muscular cannibal savages. It made whenever they had to have a serious conversation be super grating to me. So I gave the actual book a second try relatively recently in order to get my knowledge and facts straight again about Gaby Waby for this video, and man, I've gotta admit, I fucking love this book. There is so many interesting interactions between the chapter masters of the Blood Angels, but one of the ones I want to highlight is the kinship. I don't know, kinship isn't the word for it, but just the momentary not killing each other between Gabriel Seth and Centaur Jewel, who is the chapter master of a little known chapter known as the Knights of Blood, which if you didn't know, are actually a renegade chapter of Space Marines. Not Chaos Corrupted, but they are renegades. Both are chapter masters on the wrong side of the Imperium at the best of times, but Centaur Jewel is someone who actually stepped over that line and got excommunicated. And although him and his chapter were allowed to take part in the battle to save Baal, were not allowed to include themselves in the regular ranks of Blood Angels, having to station their ship far away in a very secluded area. Centaur Jewel simply just does not care about people, showing casual disregard for their lives and all the conversations with Gabriel that he has because he sees a kinship in them, and to some degree there is a similarity, but it's kind of this horseshoe effect of treating rage as the end point, where with Gabriel Seth and the Flesh Terrors, they see the importance of rage because rage is an important aspect to humanity, but with Centaur Jewel, they just think rage is cool as shit and ripping people apart is sick, which okay, both ideas have merit, but one of them leads to you getting harassed by the police more often. But what do I know? I talk about Space Marines dicks to VTubers most of the time for money, and that's my life. That is my living. So if you guys respect my opinion, you just gotta know that's the guy. That's me. That's who you're talking to. Yeah, it ends with the exact storyline you'd expect, which is, in this situation, Centaur, Jewel, and the Knights of Blood, realizing that they really only have one purpose in life, sacrifice themselves while succumbing to the rage of Khorne to fight for the Blood Angels one last time, and fight, arguably, the Blood Angels' most hated foe, the Khorne demon, Kabanda, or if you're Gareth Armstrong, Karbanda, in a final defense of their planet. While Gabriel Seth clutches a holy relic. Now, this is the scene that I kind of want to key in here. A relic that was created by their founding chapter master, Nasir Ahmet. A reliquary cask that holds a stasis-locked single feather of Sanguinius from his wings with a few drops of blood on it. This has been held in stasis for 10,000 years, as this was one of the feathers that fell off of Sanguinius upon his death. It was never able to touch the ground. Nasir Ahmet allegedly clutched the feather before it could fall fully. The Flesh Terrors kind of are very emblematic of this because the stasis casket that it is held in is actually incredibly ornately decorated by Nasir Ahmet himself. So the idea that a Flesh Terror was able to contain himself long enough to actually create rather than destroy is a very beautiful message. So clutching that piece of Flesh Terror's history, Gabriel Seth was able to stave off the blood madness of Khorne and has served his chapter to this day. Now, there's a lot here that I would like to cover going forward with him as well, like the difficult introduction of the Primaris Marines into the chapter, how much that when Dante of the Blood Angels was out of commission, he led the charge to reclaim Baal. But there is a bunch of other shit that I need to cover, and to get to my final point, because we're getting close to the end here, I do want to cover a lot of that and tie it to my main point. So, to get into that, let's discuss, why did they actually hate the Primaris reinforcements? Because, as of the designs of Belisarius Call, 1,000 praises and confused eyebrow raises to his name, the Primaris Blood Angels were designed to have no trace of the Black Rage in them, or at least to the best of his ability, remove it as much as possible, as well as the Red Thirst. It is one hell of an inherent flaw, if you couldn't tell. You know, dudes going berserk randomly and being unable to be controlled most of the time, but to the Flesh Terrors, the idea of losing access to the rage was almost sacrilege. It was so ingrained in their culture that when the reinforcements arrived, Gabriel Seth actually kept chastising them to the point where one of the Primaris Blood Angels captains, who was sent to serve with the Flesh Terrors, decided to actually argue back to the chapter master at one point, stating how Gabriel was actually weaker than him due to him being of a superior make and all that, being Primaris. Gabriel called him, in no uncertain words, a little bitch, but worst of all, he said that the Primaris Blood Angels were basically just red Ultramarines, which, for some chapters of the Blood, isn't a bad thing. But see, this Primaris captain then proceeded to get into a fight with Gabriel Seth, being goaded into it, and got the shit kicked out of him for his trouble, broken nose and all. This is when he bared his fangs and actually had an inkling of rage flicker across his face. This is the part where most people tend to tune out and stop talking. I know a lot of lore guys tend to talk about this moment because most people just say that Gabriel Seth just hated the Primaris reinforcements so they can, I don't know, hate on Primaris more. And it has seemed as such for the most part, but after the Primaris captain showed anger, Gabriel allowed him to stay and told him that specific feeling is what the chapter is about and to focus on it. The Primaris reinforcements would wipe out the culture of the chapter without proper training and administrations from the chaplains. So to have them slowly become more and more enraged and likely to go to the Black Rage is pretty fun. There is also a few short stories about the two sides, Firstborn and Primaris, not really working together well. But given enough time, they will all see eye to eye or die, who knows. I mean, it is kind of a weird special trait that the Flesh Terrors can go in and out of the Black Rage, usually because they're like on the line all the time, but you know, the whole situation is weird. The point of this video is to talk about why I love the flesh terrors and why they are one of the more relatable chapters. Yeah, it's time for me to go back on my self-aggrandizing rants, but the idea of rage and hate and anger is often maligned, which to some degree I do understand, at least a little. Rage for the sake of rage is not how the world should operate. It is hateful. Hate is something that falls under that same category. But the thing people often forget is that rage is a part of us. It is one of the most naturally occurring emotions out there. Everyone is capable of great savagery and downright violence if they were pushed far enough. A lot of us try to ignore that and claim peace, but given enough push and shove, there is always going to be rage at the end of the day. It is an emotion. It is an energy. It is fuel to accomplish things as long as it's applied righteously. I'm going to let you guys know the seeds of this video were planted from two locations. One of them was a dear friend of mine who recently started to recognize the importance of anger and rage and how to express it. Their musings about the topic kind of gave this video shape, but the true birth of this video came a long time ago. Well, at least a couple months back. The house fire. A few months back now, I went through what is probably one of the biggest tragedies of my life, a house fire. But one thing I don't often bring up was literally in the same week, I think it was on Monday of that week, I had whiffed a full blast round kick in my kickboxing class and dislocated my knee on a heavy bag, basically making so that for the first few days afterwards, I was pretty much bedbound and unable to move my leg. I'm still dealing with knee issues up to this day, but Friday was the day that week my house caught fire. Yeah, one of the worst weeks of my life, not gonna lie. I could barely walk, even with a cane. I lived on the upper floor, so when I heard someone screaming, "Fire, fire, fire, get out, get out, get out," yeah, I hobbled, and that was not fun, especially because I had to transport my pets down the stairs, but that's neither here nor there. I couldn't bend my knee at all. It was so swollen, in fact, that it looked like the center of my kneecap had a baseball hidden under it, which was not fun. I had lost my physical health, my mobility, my home, a lot of my work, a lot of my equipment, and a lot of my miniatures. Unfortunately, most of my resin shits did not survive, and I did get help from some of my closest friends. There are some people that I will cherish the connections with, and they were there with bells on and did not ask for anything in return. A lot of other individuals had opted to tell me, "Oh, don't think about it. No point in being upset about something you can't change." Literally the same day my house caught fire, the ashes had not even settled yet, and even my poor roommate had felt similar, as he had to work and keep on working at his minimum wage job while we were sifting through the ashes of our recently destroyed home. He couldn't even process what was going on because he had no time to do so, because his work wouldn't let him get off to do that. I was oftentimes alone. I was throwing out rubble, removing all the debris, and oftentimes by myself. And sometimes with friends who, from the kindness of their own hearts, showed up, and to them I am more grateful than I could ever be to anybody else. But in that way, I felt they were keeping me from getting lost to it. But to say I had known rage and anger, the likes of which I have never in my life during those 3-4 weeks of cleaning, would be an understatement. I won't lie, there are a few holes in the drywall in there that were not caused by the fires of the firefighters. Every morning I'd wake up in my shitty cheap hotel, take pain medication, put icy hot on my knee to keep the inflammation down. I'd slide on my knee brace, take my ADHD medication so that I can, focus and actually be energized, slam back a monster mango so that I could actually have even more energy, put my backpack on, get my face mask, put it in my bag, my work gloves, call a cab, and then go to work, starting at around 9 a.m. and ending at about 8 p.m. when the sun was setting, as my house had no electricity because I had to cut it when the firefighters were there. They had not come to tell me what the next step for me was because I had never dealt with this before. It was a bunch of people expecting me to know what I should have done, and yeah, sure, hindsight's a bitch. It's why it's 2020. I now know what I should be doing, but there were so many people who were lording that they were helping a little bit over my head, and through that, I I had reached this level of almost paralytic rage. But through that pure anger, that pure fucking rage, I was able to push myself to get through this task. Through pure indignation and just fucking hate, I was able to feel once again like I was at least a little bit in control as I sifted through the wreckage of my home. Now, I will say afterwards I was a broken husk of a man for a few weeks because, still nursing a pretty serious injury on my knee and also had to do all this. But, sleeping 12 hours a day for about 2 weeks straight was pretty cool, but at the end of the day, I did it. I got everything done I needed to with the help of some friends. My roommate finally was able to go there. But that's the pragmatism of rage. It can motivate you. It can push you. It can help you see things clearly. But it can also blind you. And knowing the difference between when it is helping and hurting is also a skill that not many have. A skill that I think Gabriel Seth and the Flesh Terrors know well. The Flesh Terrors know how to use rage to solve a problem. At least now they do. With the help of Gabriel Seth, they know that when used properly, rage and anger can move mountains, overcome odds, and make prissy little Primaris bitches know their goddamn place. And that is why I've always loved them. Rage is a beautiful thing when shown to be what it is, a tool like any other. Part of the shadow we all hide and something we all need to learn to incorporate into our being. Though I'm just being pretentious like always, so what do you all think? Especially about the Flesh Terrors and other Blood Angel successors out there. I would love to know. So leave a comment, hype the video, whatever that means, and also special thanks to my channel members for supporting this channel. With your help, I can pay my editors, pay myself, and pay for new art assets, which will be coming up relatively, I don't know when, but and also, more importantly, keep the channel afloat and also make sure that I can eat something at the end of the day. So, thank you very much for your help, and thank you once again for watching. Until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful night.